because it knowingly promotes ignorance and leaves viewers with a false impression of history. This is The Patriot.
Today I am reacting to my first video from the channel History Buffs. This is The Patriot, which was a Mel Gibson movie that came out I think in the year 2000. Yes, I have seen the movie many times, and how I think this works is that he's going to pick apart the movie and point out all the historical inaccuracies. Let's get to it. I know this movie is very historically inaccurate, but I'm concerned that he is going to ruin the movie for me. If you think about it, the movie Braveheart has the same exact plot as The Patriots. Ever thought about that before? It's true. We Were Soldiers. That was an awesome movie. And Braveheart. Even though it was definitely historically inaccurate as well.
Hello and welcome, history buffs. My name is Nick Hodges and I'm finally ready to have a crack at The Patriot. When it comes to badly done historical films, there are a few better examples. It's here that Hollywood's attempts to rewrite history are most obvious. Details are changed or flat out ignored. Anything that could possibly reflect badly in the United States has no appearance in this movie, because that's not its objective. It is, however, to present us a romanticized depiction of American history and to glorify American patriotism to such an extent that it patronizes the audience it is intended for. These are some of the things I truly hate in a film, because it knowingly promotes ignorance and leaves viewers with a false impression of history. This is The Patriot.
If you get any value in this video, please go ahead and smash that like button. It helps me out a lot, so thank you.
So the film begins in 1776, right before the Declaration of Independence was signed. It was an uneasy time and tensions were high. Something was happening that had never been done before. The very idea of breaking away from the king and establishing a new nation was truly revolutionary, but also controversial. Not all Americans wanted independence from Great Britain, and a line had been drawn between the rebels who believed in freedom and colonials loyal to the crown. America was anything but united back then. What started out as a small revolt in Boston had quickly escalated into a civil war. Yes, I said civil war. From the Loyalist point of view, the British soldiers were legitimate government troops. In fact, many Loyalists joined the army out of the same sense of patriotism that the rebels felt for their cause. Only 1/3 of Americans actually supported independence back then.
So some quick info. Loyalists were also known as the King's Men or Tories, and the Boston Tea Party happened in December 1773 as a protest to the Tea Act. The Sons of Liberty dumped a few hundred chests of tea into Boston Harbor. Since that act, tea consumption in the United States has gone down. During the war, it was actually considered to be unpatriotic if you drank tea, and that's why even today, coffee is the drink of choice in the US.
But The Patriot makes very little mention of this. In fact, I think we're only introduced to one loyalist in the whole movie, and we're made to feel a certain way about him.
Well, those neighbors of mine who stand against England deserve to die a traitor's death,
Just in case you didn't get it, you're supposed to hate this guy. He's the Judas, he's the traitor. Let's not explore his motivations, his political beliefs, or his reasons to fight his fellow countrymen. You're supposed to dismiss him and label him as a backstabber. So anyway, how did this war start? Well, if we left it to The Patriot to explain.
If you mean by patriot, am I angry about taxation without representation? Well, yes, I am. Should the American colonies govern themselves independently? I believe they can, and they should.
And that's generally about it. For the rest of the movie, they just drone on and on about freedom. But freedom from what? Now, of course, taxation without representation was an important factor, but this only begins to scratch the surface of a much bigger picture. In 1763, the British had won a major victory at the end of the 7 Years' War, securing more land and wealth for their colonies. Although this left Great Britain in a position of being the world's first superpower, it wasn't a war they wanted to fight and left them in huge debt.
So he's talking about the 7-Year War, which I've never heard of. However, I'm pretty sure he's talking about the French and Indian War, which is what Americans call it.
Now, seeing how British subjects in America benefited the most out of this costly war, with more land and more resources, the government thought it was only fair that they be the ones to help with the bill. However, this would not be the case, as many Americans just refused to pay these new taxes. Surprisingly, Great Britain didn't even collect on these new taxes. They backed down time and time again until finally they had enough. The famous tax on tea was the only tax they were going to enforce, and that's when the colonists revolted. They pressed the issue that they wanted no taxation without representation, but to the British government, they were already seen as British subjects and were therefore represented. However, I think that another factor was in play, and that was the British government regulating colonial expansion. In 1763, the Royal Proclamation line was issued that forbade settlement past the Appalachian Mountains. This angered American settlers, as coming to America and finding new land to call their own was the whole point of coming over there.
Why did they forbid that exactly?
There's a scene in the movie that contradicts this, where we see the British planning to seize new lands after the war.
When this war is over here in the colonies, the new aristocracy will be landowners. Tell me about Ohio.
But Ohio wouldn't be on the agenda because the Royal Proclamation line reserved Ohio and all lands west for Native Americans. This was issued to reconcile with the Indians for past offenses and prevent future hostilities. Now, I'm under no illusion that this would have been a permanent thing and Western expansion was inevitable.
1802 is when Ohio actually became a state. So yes, that was definitely a temporary thing for the Native Americans.
But having the Brits scheme about it this early on is just premature at best. So with no immediate opportunity for future expansion or for American representation in Parliament, revolution escalated quickly into war. The character of Benjamin Martin is loosely based on several historic figures, but in my opinion, the most relevant one is Francis Marion. Francis Marion was also known as the Swamp Fox and operated in South Carolina during the Revolutionary War. His base of operations was Snow's Island, which was located in the middle of the South Carolina swamps, not unlike how Benjamin Martin operated from the old Spanish mission.
So those scenes in the movie were filmed at Cypress Gardens, which is in Berkeley County, South Carolina, and I've been there many times. It's a really beautiful area, actually.
He is generally considered to be one of the fathers of modern guerrilla warfare, and his militia were brutally effective against the British. But unlike Martin, Marion was childless and did not even marry until after the war. The decision made to give Benjamin Martin's character a family was not only to allow the audience to sympathise with him, but also give him something to fight for. When his son is shot by Tavington, it provides the catalyst for him to organise a militia and fight.
Sounds like another Mel Gibson movie. One of his loved ones gets killed by the British, and that serves as a catalyst for him to go and fight. Braveheart, maybe?
However, these changes don't bother me. It's this little scene that does.
By standing order of His Majesty King George, all slaves of the American colonies who fight for the crown will be granted their freedom with our victory.
Sir, we're not slaves. We work this land. Freedmen.
Oh, then you're freed men who will have the opportunity and the privilege of fighting in the King's army, aren't you?
That is by far the most disgusting thing I've ever heard in a historical movie. No wonder Benjamin Martin's character is only loosely based on Francis Marion, because Francis Marion was a slave owner. In fact, Francis Marion's slaves ran away from his plantation to fight for the British, which says a lot about the guy. Now, just because by modern standards slavery disgusts us today, doesn't mean that we should accept a retelling of history that is afraid to approach it.
I read some trivia about this movie, and apparently Mel Gibson initially wanted to include the fact that Benjamin Martin did own slaves in the movie. However, the filmmaker, I think it was Roland Emmerich, decided against it because he thought that the audience would not be able to accept Benjamin Martin as a good person and a hero. I understand that perspective, but that whitewashes history. That's like making a historical movie about George Washington or Thomas Jefferson and not including the fact that they were slave owners. If a filmmaker did that, they would lose all credibility, which is what happened here.
I think I would give audiences the benefit of the doubt to accept the main protagonist if he was a slave owner.
Never underestimate your audience. They're generally sensitive, intelligent people who respond positively to quality entertainment.
Too right, mate. And what's worse is that this scene seems to be an attempt to villainize the British by having them kidnap these black workers just to oppress these poor plantation owners. That the British are simply using slaves as tools of war. But in another scene, we see the Americans do the exact same thing.
It says take notice. By order General George Washington and the Continental Congress, all bound slaves who give minimum 1 year service in the Continental Army will be granted freedom and be paid a bounty of 5 shillings for each month of service. Did you hear that? First they're gonna free them, and then they're gonna pay them.
Only another 6 months.
What in the hell are you gonna do with freedom?
Can you see the difference here? The gentle swelling of the music and the look of hope and determination in his eyes. This has a totally different tone than the one before. Here the film is twisting the American proclamation of freedom to be noble and just, whilst the British version is the exact opposite.
George Washington and the Continental Congress never made any kind of proclamation like that. You serve for a year and you get freedom. No. It all depended on the colony. Some colonies allowed that, but there was not some centralized proclamation, though. And about 5,000 blacks, African Americans, did actually fight in this war on both sides, and approximately 1,000 Native Americans also fought on both sides.
The truth of the matter is that when the British first declared their promise of freedom to slaves, it scared the shit out of the Americans. So when they made their offer, it was out of desperation, not out of noble sentiment. Both sides were just as cruel in how they used and manipulated African Americans for their cause.
George Washington initially did not like the idea of freeing slaves. Only later on did he actually endorse it.
So why is the Patriot biased between one side and not the other, especially if they're both doing the same thing? I think there's one particular moment in the film that is worth looking at. It's shortly after the scene when Benjamin Martin and his sons ambush the British convoy. His son confides to his father his own personal feelings about killing the British soldiers.
I killed those men.
You did what I told you to do. You did what you had to. There was no wrong in it.
I'm glad I killed them. I'm glad.
Now, I know it's not safe to jump to conclusions, but I just can't shake this feeling that the Patriot has a very anti-British sentiment.
Every damn one of them redcoats deserves to die.
I'm gonna kill me some redcoats.
Where else do I get the opportunity to kill a few redcoats?
Surrender! We surrender! Oh!
Perhaps a few wounded ones when you're not looking.
For the love of God, we...
This is murder! Well, Reverend, they're redcoats, and they've earned it.
But that just could be my interpretation. However, the film's objective is clear, and that is to villainize the Brits as much as possible. As antagonists, they are comically portrayed to be bloodthirsty, brutish thugs. Every conceivable negative stereotype that's attributed to the British is amplified.
Throughout the entire movie, that British officer right there was the only one that was actually portrayed as a good person with a conscience. Everyone else was portrayed horribly, and he didn't even last that long. I think he was killed in the next scene.
Pompous, stuck-up, and arrogant are to name a few.
These rustics are so inept. Nearly takes the honor out of victory. Nearly.
Now, far be it from me to suggest that the British never committed any atrocities, as in every war they were committed by both sides. You only need to look at the historical figure Tavington is based on, Banastre Tarleton, who built up quite a reputation amongst Patriot rebels as a butcher. more specifically due to his involvement in the Waxhaw Massacre in South Carolina. Now, what happened is the subject of much debate. During the heat of battle, Continental Army Colonel Buford raised a white flag calling for quarter. At some point, a musket was fired and hit Tarleton's horse, incapacitating him. In a fit of rage, his loyalist cavalry, believing the call of surrender to be a trick, charged into Buford's men and cut them down, including many who still tried to surrender. Of the 400 Virginians, over 100 were killed, and this is where Tarleton's reputation as a butcher was most prevalent. The fighting and following battles grew in ferocity on both sides, and Tarleton's quarter became a common expression for his refusal to take prisoners. He was dubbed the Bloody Band for his belief in total war and was used by American propaganda to fuel British resentment. In The Patriot, however, Tavington's cruelty and malice is turned up to 11. If killing prisoners of war doesn't make you hate him, then surely killing children will.
Stupid boy.
Now, I'm sure that the filmmakers will insist that these are the actions of a single man, but that's not the impression left with audiences. What Tavington does reflects on how the characters and audience view the British. See, there's a difference between taking creative liberties in order to drive the plot of an historical film, to simply making shit up. Which brings us to what is perhaps the most controversial part of the whole movie.
This town has given aid to Benjamin Martin and his rebels. I wish to know his whereabouts. So, anyone who comes forward may be forgiven their treason. Very well. You had your chance.
Wait. This man gives Martin and his men supplies.
Quiet.
He brings them to Black Swamp.
He's a liar!
You damn
In the marsh,
fool.
by the old Spanish mission.
This man here.
Yes, sir.
The Black Swamp, you say, by the old Spanish mission. Thank you very much. Shut the doors.
But you said we'd be forgiven.
And indeed you may.
That's between you and God.
This is the moment when the Patriot can no longer claim to be based on history, because there is nothing in written records to suggest that the British ever burnt a church filled with civilians. If anything like this were to have happened, it would have been burnt into the memory of every American today. Can you imagine the propaganda value this would have had for the Patriot cause back then? Take, for example, the impact of the infamous Boston Massacre, and only 5 people died there, probably making it the most unmassacring massacre in the history of massacres.
So the movie was definitely wrong for portraying the British in that light. It was way too over the top. However, were the British capable of doing such atrocities? And the answer is yes. Thousands of atrocities and massacres happened to Indians by the hands of the British during their rule. Look up the Jallianwala Bagh Massacre in Amritsar, India, in Punjab, April 1919. If you want a watered-down version of what happened, watch the movie Gandhi. If you want a realistic portrayal of what actually happened, watch the movie Siddhar Udham.
So, what's this movie's reason for this massacre not being common knowledge?
The honor is found in the end, not the means. This will be forgotten.
No one forgets stuff like this. To find anything even similar, you can't even look at the American War for Independence, but at the Second World War. On June 10th, 1944, a massacre took place eerily similar to the one presented in The Patriot. In the village of Oradour-sur-Glane in France, German troops came and ordered all the townsfolk to assemble. The women and children were locked in the church with explosives, whilst the SS took the men to nearby garages and barns to be shot. In total, 642 people died. One of the most horrific war crimes in history, and it somehow ends up inspiring a scene supposed to be set to the American War for Independence. It just seems like this film is so aggressive with its hateful stance against the British that it's not even trying to be subtle. Like this scene, for example, where in the final battle, Benjamin Martin literally stabs Tavington's horse with the American flag.
A little over the
You
top.
don't have to be a symbologist to figure out what that's supposed to be about. So, it's no wonder that this movie stirred up so much controversy with allegations about being anti-British. Look, if you want the Brits to be the bad guys, then have them do stuff we know they did. You can't create the largest empire in history by being nice about it. So, I'm sure there's plenty of material to work with. Maybe have your historical epic be based on history instead of bullshit. Potential hate-mongering aside, there is one final thing that needs to be addressed with the Patriot. Now, while it's not nearly as offensive as his depiction of slavery or fictional atrocities, it's definitely worth at least thinking about. It's pretty clear that the Patriot was made to celebrate some of the best qualities America stands for today, particularly its beliefs in equality.
If we win this war, a lot of things will change.
What will change?
They call this the New World. It's not. It's the same as the old. But we'll have a chance to build a new world. A world where all men are created equal under God.
Equal. Sounds good.
The problem is, though, that this movie brings up American ideals today, but not back then. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence stated what many Americans believed in and fought for. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But unfortunately, exceptions were made, and in reality didn't apply to all Americans. Most of the African American rebels who fought for independence were never given the freedom they were promised. Native American Indians were systematically slaughtered to the brink of extinction, and 100,000 American loyalists were expelled from their country of birth, never to see it again.
So many of the Tories actually fled to Spanish Florida, the Caribbean, Great Britain, and Canada, but a handful did actually stay as well.
The true prospect of equality and civil rights would continue to be ignored well into the 20th century.
I have a dream that one day
It wasn't until the 1960s
this nation will rise
when
up
black people could vote.
and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
And only just recently have the promises of these great words been fully realized, this time in regards to gay rights.
And I believed that discrimination because of somebody's sexual orientation or gender identity ran counter to who we are as a people. And it's a violation of the basic tenets on which this nation was founded. I believe that gay couples deserve the same legal rights as every other couple in this country.
The real truth history tells us is that independence did not automatically result in a great America. It was rather the beginning of a work in progress, one that is still continuing today. My problem with The Patriot is that it's not a true representation of American history, and it's quite clear that it's not because they didn't do their research, because the battle scenes, the sets, and the costumes are extremely well done. What is wrong is when filmmakers distort and fabricate history when they find things they don't like, shaping the truth to be what they believe it should be, and by doing so, promote misconceptions and ignorance to audiences everywhere. Well, that about wraps it up. My name is Nick Hodges, and thanks for watching, History Buffs. And remember, if you like the show, help the channel grow. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know in the comment section what you thought about The Patriot.
Please go to his channel and give his video a like. I will link it down below. And imagine that, a Brit not liking a movie about the American Revolution. No, for real though, thank you guys so much for watching, and I really did enjoy the video. I thought he did an amazing job, and I definitely have mixed feelings now about this movie. I knew this movie had a lot of errors in it, but I did not realize the scope of just how inaccurate it actually was. It's kind of like the military history version of The Day After Tomorrow and Armageddon. But yes, this movie definitely paints the British in a horrible light. And now that I think about it, what Hollywood movies paint the British in a good light? Because I can't really think of a lot. Maybe The King's Speech, Dunkirk, and I want to say Love Actually, but something tells me that that is a British movie, not American. If you can think of some more movies, then please drop it in the comments. And if you do want to watch an accurate military history video, here you go.